I'm exhausted, and I do it to myself. I do it to myself. I need to learn all of the strategies that will help me slow down.
At 71 years old, Beth was ready to face an ADHD diagnosis.
I used to line the magazines on my coffee table up and I'd measure them out so that they would be perfectly aligned. Who cares? Who cares? Yeah, like I could have saved a lot of energy and spent more time on me and what I needed and what I wanted. And I'm determined to do that now. So I can say, okay, it's a diagnosable condition. Okay, I'll take medication for it. Anything. I've got 20 years left to live, and I don't want to be burdened by this.
In this story, we talked with an expert in ADHD in older adults about what help is available, and we learned from Beth about how she went from being a failing and distracted high school student to a successful nurse, but how it all comes with a high price when you've spent a lifetime using coping mechanisms.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting because I did nothing else. I wanted it so badly, but I did nothing else. It was nose to the grindstone. I was a head nurse by the time I was 27. And I think that was my dedication to my career. And I would take work home on weekends, which you shouldn't have to do. You shouldn't want to do. But that was when the perfectionism kicked in, and trying to please others. My boss, right? Sure, I get shit done. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm the best volunteer because I work the hardest. I'm the best nurse because I worked the hardest. I 3/4 of the best mom. you know, yeah. ADHD has allowed me to get stuff done. It's exhausting, but it's who I am. It's who I am. And people can appreciate that I get stuff done. And I'm the organizer for a lot of things in my life, neighborhood groups, friendship groups, um, workout groups, things like that. Because I've been unhappy for a long time, I want other people to feel happy, and somebody's got to take the lead. Somebody's got to take the lead. So, but I'm getting tired of doing that too. I have a quick temper. I have a husband that stood by me every step of the way. I have had tears over it. He has learned to pitch in and help. He has learned to say, how can I help you? Which is really, really helpful, really helpful. Because I've been behaving like this all my life. I think once you have kids too, your life is even busier. Working shift work as a nurse, looking after the kids, a husband that traveled a lot, it really ramps up. And I always said I was on the treadmill of life for 25 years. And now I want to get off. I think there's always been something in the back of my mind saying, slow down. You don't have to do all this. I felt like I was setting my expectations for myself really high. And then when I saw the study from the University of Calgary come into my inbox, I thought, maybe that's what it is. Maybe I should investigate this, because prior to me doing this study last April, my family doctor had put me on a medication to help with the symptoms, which did, as I said, settle them down a wee bit. But the study was fascinating, and the questions that they asked me that would entitle me to participate in the study were really thought-provoking. And I thought, Yeah, that's me. Hmm. Yeah, I do that too. So a lot of boxes were checked. Being a nurse, I have always been a need to know person, and I would just like to get the final answer so I can um, relieve myself of the guilt of acting like this all my life. So I can say, okay, it's a diagnosable condition. Okay, I'll take medication for it. Anything. I've got 20 years left to live, and I don't want to be burdened by this. A light bulb, a light bulb moment when I was meeting all the criteria for ADHD. Um, it was a bit of a relief. It was a bit of a relief. Um, now I just need to work on the tools to slow it all down. Quit spinning, quit ping-ponging, as my family says. And my youngest daughter is a psychotherapist. And she says, Mom, you got to do something about this. You've got to do something about this. And she was really helpful when we meet at the dog park every morning, and I'd be walking with her and I'd be having one of those days, and she'd say, let me find somebody for you. And so through her associations with other psychologists, she put a post on their Facebook group, and she said, I have a woman who is 71 years of age, who is exhibiting these symptoms, who would really like to get to the bottom of it. And the woman that I'm currently seeing reached out immediately, and she's got the tools that I need, and she and I have a really good rapport, so I'm hopeful. Because it takes a lot of emotions away from you where you're blaming yourself, you're saying, I'm not good enough, I should be able to do all this. And just to answer, like we've all questioned um, our functioning. I'm sure we've all questioned it. And why did I do that? And what? Just to give you some clarity that it's not you, it is an illness that can be treated. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. And I think women are overlooked. People just assume you're a busy woman. You've got a lot of things on your plate. It would have made a difference. I used to line the magazines on my coffee table up, and I'd measure them out so that they would be perfectly aligned. Who cares? Who cares? Yeah, like I could have saved a lot of energy and spent more time on me and what I needed and what I wanted. And I'm determined to do that now. My one daughter, the one that got tested for ADHD, she's gone to the other extreme than I am, in that her house is a little messy. Her kids are way more important. Like, my kids were really important to me, but I always had to do something, or it was always hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, or it was me doing for them to make life quicker, faster, easier. So I wasn't as crabby. Can't go back.
Yeah.
Can't go back. But I think communication now is better. Mothers and their children, we talk about feelings. We don't, for years actually, I did stuff my feelings down with food. I have mastered that. But we talk about feelings in our house. So they've been super supportive. it's not something you can do all by yourself. Um, and I see my elder daughter has two children. I see that she's a different parent than I was. She's she's willing to let go the stuff to be a great mother and a playmate with her friends, and she's a marathon runner, so she knows how to divide up her time so she gets that running time, so her kids get good quality time. She and her husband have breaks from the kids and have good quality time. Mental health was such a taboo subject for so many years. You hid it in shame. Um, it was the family secret. You didn't want the neighbors to know. You didn't want your colleagues to know. But I think it's freeing to say, I'm human. I have frailties. I have issues. And I want to work towards getting better.
So what do you suggest someone does who suspects they may, an older adult that suspects they may have ADHD or anxiety?
Yeah, I think a good first step is to talk to your family doctor. I know that sounds like boilerplate, advice, but one of the most important things to ascertain in an AD for to receive an ADHD diagnosis is a long-standing chronic pattern of symptoms. So if a person is experiencing ADHD-like symptoms only in the past 2 years, that's probably not ADHD. And I say family doctor is a good first point of contact because for many people, their family doctor has, a long history of knowledge of this person's medical history and, how they've been over the years. And so is probably in a good position to recognize, how chronic these things may seem. And also, as I said, things like depression, anxiety, other mental health conditions, and other physical health conditions can mimic ADHD symptoms as well. So again, your family doctor is in a good position to be able to rule out some of those other things that could be presenting like ADHD. And then normally what a family doctor will do is, well, ideally, what a family doctor will do is do like a brief screening to get a sense of, are you presenting with any ADHD-like symptoms? If so, how many? And then if there is some indication that potentially maybe ADHD might be on the table essentially, that ideally what your family doctor would do would be either to refer you to an ADHD specialist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist who could do a full assessment. Or if they've received if your family doctor has received specialized training, they could proceed to a full assessment as well. The full assessment is quite resource intensive. It's quite lengthy. It's many hours. It usually ideally will involve other people, so siblings or a spouse who may be able to comment on your functioning. So yeah, so that the full assessment is quite intensive and usually will be sort of only pursued if there's some evidence in the screening process that, yeah, it looks like ADHD might be a possibility here.
Do you have to go through that process to get medication or counseling?
Um, Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. Ideally, best practice guidelines recommend that yes, a person should undergo a full, comprehensive, thorough assessment to receive an ADHD diagnosis and therefore to receive treatment. In practice, I know that that's not always the case. I work with people who have told me, oh, my doctor, did some questionnaires with me and decided I had ADHD and prescribed medication and it's working really well for me. So I think it does happen that people receive a prescription for stimulant medications or non-stimulant ADHD medications that really works for them without having gone through the full assessment, but that's not consistent with best practice guidelines.
Is there a cost to moving forward past having your family doctor give you a prescription?
It depends if you are if you decide to pursue an ADHD assessment, sort of in just in the private sector, and in that case, you would pay out of pocket. If your family doctor were to refer you to psychiatry, sometimes, I mean, the wait lists are often quite a bit longer, obviously, but that pathway is covered by healthcare.
Is there, or do you know how people might have coped with this in the past?
Yeah.
Have we ever had a chance to talk to people who have gone through this to say this is how I was, how it affected my life as a teenager, or say in the 50s or something?
Yeah, that's actually something that we're really interested in my lab. We just are wrapping up a project that we called Distracted, Hyperactive, and Thriving. So, understanding what factors can help adults with ADHD thrive in their jobs or in their relationships. And one of the things that we are identifying is social support. So, people who seem to be doing really well with their ADHD, so functioning really well and not needing a lot of external support, are people who report high levels of social support and available, people who are available in their lives to provide that social connection. Now, those results are a little bit difficult to, like, the directionality of it is a little bit difficult to tease apart, because it's possible that people who would be who are naturally thrivers tend to have more capacity to engage in social relationships. It could also be the other way around, that people who have support from people then go on to thrive. So we're not quite at that stage of being able to tell the directionality of things, but social support does seem to be something that people name when we ask them to describe what it, how they're coping. I think some people with ADHD, particularly women, tend to develop coping strategies that work for them in the short term, but that are not maybe sustainable in the long term, and that can lead to exhaustion and burnout, which is potentially one of the reasons as well that women tend to get later diagnoses than men, because of these coping mechanisms. So masking is something that is named often in when talking about women with ADHD. So masking refers to this idea of basically having to, or choosing to put in sort of extra work to seem socially like you've got everything together. So what this means for women is, from an outside observer's perspective, they look like they're managing fine, right? They have it, they are seeming to be successful in their careers, they're raising their kids, they're maintaining relationships, but the effort that it takes for these women to complete those tasks and maintain those relationships and meet that bar, the effort that it takes is disproportionate to a woman without ADHD. So it takes, much more cognitive effort, much more time, much more resources to do something that, again, for a woman without ADHD seems to be much easier. And so, again, that is a way of coping with ADHD symptoms that is effective in the short term, because you are able to keep it all together for a short time. But again, the cost, the mental cost of sort of keeping up that mask, maintaining that mask, often ends up being unsustainable in the long term. And again, leads to burnout and a delayed diagnosis and things like that.
You mentioned coping skills, so masking is a type of coping, and
It
are
is
there
a type of
other coping mechanisms that we should be aware of?
So masking is a type of coping mechanism, but that I would argue is not adaptive, because it's a coping skill in that it works, but it's maladaptive in that it's not sustainable. It leads to poorer outcomes in the long run. I think some of the healthier coping mechanisms that we could encourage people to be using to deal with ADHD is to recognize, first of all, that ADHD is sort of the way it's defined or the way it's conceptualized is uh, an inability to or difficulties regulating your attention and your executive functioning. So executive functioning meaning, multitasking, planning, organizing, all these things tend to be quite difficult for people with ADHD. And recognizing that, I think, can then lead to and I know I sound like I'm oversimplifying this. For people listening with ADHD, it's obviously not that simple, but relying on things that can essentially act as your frontal lobes. So calendars, reminders, alarms, relying on other people, delegating, sharing the work. These are some things that I think can lessen the load on your frontal lobes. But again, I realize as I'm saying it that it sounds, it's easier said than done. But I think, I think relying on external mechanisms as much as possible, scaffolding, structures, schedules, making lightening the load as much as you can on your executive function is an effective coping mechanism for many.
Do you know then how we can explain the people who are, very successful and that have gone on to get university degrees and done great things? How do they do that while still having attention deficit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think there could be many things at play. The first thing is many people who are successful with ADHD are very, very smart, so have very high IQ. I think people who are effective at navigating life with ADHD also tend to structure their environment in a way that serves them. Because really, when you think about why ADHD is a problem for many people, the answer lies often in the environment. So having difficulty focusing or multitasking or planning or organizing is only a problem if you live or operate in a world where you must plan and organize and multitask and focus your attention, which is why many people with ADHD thrive in professions, for example, where you don't need to do those things, right? Where people with ADHD tend to thrive in jobs that are creative or artistic, or where they're not necessarily self-employed, but where they can structure their own schedules and structure their own choose to engage in things that interest them. So I think if you can control your environment or choose environments or create environments for yourself that work with your way of thinking, with your neurodivergent, brain, I think that can lead to thriving.
What would you recommend to an older adult who suspects they may have ADHD or anxiety, and thinks, well, I've lived this long with it. Why would I bother getting it diagnosed or treated or anything?
Yeah, I will reiterate that I think talking to your family doctor is a good first step. And I don't think it's ever too late to get to seek out treatment for a person who feels that they may need it. Some people decide not to pursue treatment, or for whatever reason decide they don't want to take ADHD medication. I will say medication is not the only treatment option. There are other treatment options that don't involve medication, such as ADHD coaching and counseling and support groups, and goal management training and executive supports. There's all kinds of non-medication options. But regardless of what treatment options a person may be considering, I do still think that it can be beneficial to seek out treatment, whether it's for ADHD or anxiety. There are lots of very effective treatments for both of those things. That we have some good treatments that provide relief to people, to many people, and again, I think that getting treatment for whether it's ADHD or anxiety can often enhance quality of life in a number of really important ways, even if it's just enhancing your social relationships, or your capacity to engage in hobbies or things like that.
Oh, and you had mentioned earlier the effects menopause might have. Is there any problems with that being misdiagnosed with either ADHD or symptoms overlapping, or is there research done on that?
Yes, this is an emerging area of research in the ADHD field. And we're still figuring out how menopause and ADHD impact women, but the short answer is there seems to be an impact of menopause on ADHD that seems to be linked to declining estrogen, and how declines in estrogen impact the effectiveness of dopamine signaling, which is an important brain chemical that enhances mood and cognition. And dopamine and estrogen essentially work together to support mood and cognition. So when estrogen declines during menopause, or even during the premenstrual week in younger women, as estrogen declines, dopamine becomes less effective at enhancing mood and cognition. And this even impacts how, like women without ADHD. What I've just described to you is true for all women, but particularly impactful for women with ADHD, because dopamine signaling is already atypical in ADHD. So ADHD is a disorder where we see abnormal dopamine signaling, and so the declines in estrogen appear to have disproportionate impacts on mood and cognition in many, not all, but many women with ADHD.
And when you say, sorry, I just to clarify, abnormal dopamine, does that mean more or less with
Um,
ADHD in women?
it means that dopamine signaling does not occur in the same way in people with ADHD than without. I don't think that it is a question of more or less. It's just the way in which dopamine is transmitted. Although I say here that I'm not a medical
Right.
doctor, and
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
not a brain chemical specialist, but
Mhm.
that's my understanding. And so what's tricky here is that, again, in normal aging and normal menopause, lots of women report brain fog and declines in mood, and so again, declines in mood instability, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sort of getting mentally organized. Those symptoms that are normally occurring in menopause can mimic symptoms of ADHD. And so I'll circle back to something I said at the beginning: is it's important when we're quite querying or wondering about a diagnosis of ADHD. One of the most important things to ascertain is that these symptoms, at least some of them, must have been present since childhood. You don't suddenly develop ADHD as an adult. However, what we might see is that a woman has had ADHD all her life, maybe undiagnosed, has been, compensating through masking, through all the things we've been talking about. And then menopause hits, and it's just the straw that breaks the camel's back. And then these compensatory mechanisms just aren't working anymore. And that's when a woman may seek out help from a professional because she can't manage anymore. But that's very different from a new onset of symptoms, right? What I'm describing here is these symptoms have always been present sort of under the surface, and then menopause is just sort of the last straw.
And one last thing for you. Um, at what point would you suggest, and I know it's going to be different for everyone, but is there some points that where a person should say, yeah, I really should. It's about time. I need to go and get this dealt with. Are there some definite things that are going on in your life where you should say, yeah, it's definitely worth it to seek help for this?
Yeah, I think for adults who are struggling with feelings of like being constantly behind no matter how hard they try, or feeling, looking around them and feeling like tasks that other people seem to handle easily feel disproportionately difficult for them. um, long-standing feelings of not living up to your potential, and feeling a deep mismatch between what you feel you could be able to do and what you've accomplished in your life. Those are very difficult feelings for people to navigate. And I think that if those are things that a person is dealing with, that could be reflective of ADHD. Again, this pattern of feeling like you can't keep up and can never be on top of things. Um, and so, if a person were to say that to me, that this is something they've been experiencing for a long time, I would probably suggest to that person, maybe ADHD is something that you're dealing with. Maybe you want to reach out to your family doctor and ask for an assessment.
There's shame associated with you being different, and I always felt that I should have had serious counseling 35 years ago, but we couldn't afford it. And it's your life, and you only have one opportunity to live it. And therapy, medication, diagnosis is my goal, is to figure this all out. When I found out my daughter was pregnant in November, I thought, oh my God, I gotta live to be 92 to see this child graduate college. And I want to be happy. I want to be able to enjoy every minute of the next 20 years because I have been bogged down all these years. So getting a diagnosis is first thing. Getting the medication is the next thing. And using and learning the tools that will help you put your life in order.